In a small, sleepy village surrounded by thick forests and misty hills, there lived a woman named Elena. She was a kind-hearted mother who had spent most of her life working hard to provide for her family. Her husband had passed away years ago, leaving her alone to raise their only child, Maria. Despite the challenges, Elena always found strength in her daughter's laughter and determination. Maria was everything to her, a bright light in an otherwise ordinary life. Maria grew up to be strong-willed and fiercely independent. From a young age, she dreamed of serving her country. She often spoke about joining the army, inspired by stories of bravery and sacrifice. Elena, however, dreaded the thought of losing her daughter to war. She begged Maria to reconsider, offering alternatives like teaching or nursing, but Maria's resolve never wavered. "Mama," she would say with a gentle smile, "I want to protect people, I want to make you proud." Though Elena tried to hide it, those words broke her heart even more because deep down she already was proud. Too proud to stand in the way of Maria's dreams. When Maria turned 22, she enlisted in the military. The day she left for Rhine, training was one of the hardest days of Elena's life. As she waved goodbye at the bus stop, tears streaming down her face, she whispered prayers under her breath, hoping Maria would return safely. For months, they exchanged letters filled with updates and reassurances. Maria wrote about her rigorous training, the friendships she made, and how much she missed home. Elena clung to these letters like lifelines, reading them over and over again just to feel closer to her daughter. Then came the letter that shattered Elena's world. It arrived on a cold winter morning, delivered by two uniformed officers standing solemnly at her doorstep. Their hats were tucked under their arms and their faces were grim. Before they even spoke, Elena felt her knees weaken. She knew this visit could mean only one thing. With trembling hands, she accepted the envelope they handed her. Inside was a formal notice stating that Maria had been killed in action during a mission overseas. The words blurred as tears flooded Elena's eyes. She collapsed onto the floor, clutching the paper as if trying to rip apart the cruel reality it represented. The officers stayed long enough to offer condolences and answer a few questions, but their answers did little to ease Elena's pain. They explained that Maria had died heroically while protecting her fellow soldiers. There would be a ceremony in her honor, they said, and her remains would be sent back home for burial. Elena nodded numbly, unable to process anything beyond the fact that her daughter, the center of her universe, was gone forever. Days passed in a haze of grief. Friends and neighbors visited Elena, bringing food and comforting words, but nothing could fill the void Maria had left behind. Every corner of the house reminded her of her daughter, the chair where Maria used to sit, the photographs lining the walls, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Sleep eluded Elena. Every time she closed her eyes, images of Maria haunted her mind. Sometimes she imagined hearing Maria's voice calling out to her, only to wake up and realize it was just the wind rattling the windows. What troubled Elena most, though, were the unanswered questions swirling in her head. Why hadn't the military allowed her to see Maria's body? Why had they rushed the funeral arrangements without giving her a chance to properly say goodbye? And why did the officer who delivered the news seem so evasive when she asked for details about Maria's death? These doubts gnawed at her relentlessly, planting seeds of suspicion in her already broken heart. One evening, as Elena sat alone in the dimly lit living room, staring blankly at the wall, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if Maria wasn't really dead? What if there had been a mistake? The idea seemed far-fetched, almost ridiculous, yet it refused to leave her alone. She remembered reading somewhere about cases where people were mistakenly declared dead. Could that have happened to Maria? The possibility, no matter how slim, ignited a spark of hope within her, a dangerous mix of desperation and denial. Elena wrestled with the idea for days. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as madness brought on by grief, but another part, the part driven by maternal instinct, urged her to act. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Finally, late one night, she made a decision that would change her life forever. She would go to the cemetery and dig up Maria's grave. If her suspicions proved false, she would face the truth head-on. But if there was even the slightest chance Maria was still alive, she owed it to herself and to her daughter to find out. As she prepared for the unthinkable task, Elena's hands trembled with fear and anticipation. She gathered a shovel. From the shed, her movements slow and deliberate. The weight of what she was about to do pressed heavily on her shoulders. Desecrating a grave was not only illegal but also deeply taboo. Yet, none of that mattered to her anymore. All that mattered was uncovering the truth, no matter how painful or shocking it might be. Under the cover of darkness, Elena made her way to the cemetery. The journey felt endless, each step heavier than the last. When she finally reached Maria's grave, she hesitated, staring at the freshly turned earth beneath the pale moonlight. Guilt battled with determination inside her chest. What if someone saw her? What if she unearthed something unbearable? But the need to know, to truly know, overpowered everything else. Taking a deep breath, she plunged the shovel into the ground and began to dig. Each thrust of the shovel echoed through the silent graveyard, the sound magnified by the stillness of the night. Dirt clung to Elena's fingers and clothes, but she didn't stop. Her muscles ached and sweat dripped down her forehead despite the biting cold. Hours passed and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed through, driven by a mother's unyielding love. Finally, the tip of the shovel struck something solid. Her breath caught in her throat as she cleared away the remaining soil to reveal the coffin. For a moment, Elena froze, staring at the wooden box before her. It looked smaller than she remembered, almost fragile under the dim light. Doubt crept into her mind once again. Was she making a terrible mistake? Would opening the coffin bring her peace or destroy her completely? Shaking off her hesitation, she pried open the lid, steeling herself for whatever lay inside. And then, she saw her. Maria lay inside, dressed in her military uniform, her hands folded neatly across her chest. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Elena exhaled sharply, relief washing over her briefly. But then something strange caught her attention. Maria's skin wasn't cold or stiff like it should have been. Instead, it felt warm to the touch. Panic surged through Elena as she leaned closer, inspecting her daughter's face. There were no signs of decay, no smell of death. Instead, Maria's lips twitched slightly as though she were trying to speak. Elena stumbled backward, her heart pounding wildly. This couldn't be real. Dead bodies didn't move. Yet here she was, witnessing something impossible. Her mind raced with questions. Was this some cruel trick of grief playing tricks on her senses? Or had Maria not been dead after all? Overwhelmed by confusion and disbelief, Elena realized she had no choice but to take the next step. Whatever. The truth was, she needed to find out, for Maria's sake and for her own. Elena's hands trembled as she stared at Maria lying in the coffin. Her mind was a storm of emotions, shock, disbelief, and a flicker of hope that refused to die. She knelt beside the grave, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The air felt colder now, but Elena barely noticed. All she could focus on was the slight twitch of Maria's lips. It wasn't imagination. It was real. Something inside her screamed that she couldn't leave her daughter here. Not like this. Summoning every ounce of courage, Elena reached out and gently touched Maria's cheek. The warmth beneath her fingertips confirmed what she had already suspected. Maria wasn't dead. Tears streamed down Elena's face as relief and terror collided within her. How was this possible? Had the military made a catastrophic mistake? Or was there something darker at play? Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Maria needed help, and Elena was the only person who could give it to her. With trembling hands, Elena carefully lifted Maria out of the coffin. Her daughter was lighter than she remembered, her body frail and fragile. Elena wrapped her in the blanket she had brought along, cradling her close as if shielding her from the world. Every step back to the house felt like an eternity. The night seemed endless. the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional hoot of an owl. Elena's heart raced with fear of being caught, but she pressed on, driven by the instinct to protect her child. When they finally reached home, Elena laid Maria on the bed, covering her with more blankets to keep her warm. She sat beside her, watching intently for any sign of life. Hours passed, each minute stretching longer than the last. Elena held Maria's hand, whispering prayers and words of encouragement. "Come back to me, my love," she murmured over and over again. "Please, wake up." Just as exhaustion began to take its toll, Maria stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing dazed, unfocused eyes. For a moment, she looked around the room, confusion etched across her face. Then, her gaze landed on Elena. "Mama," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. Elena burst into tears, pulling Maria into a tight embrace. Her daughter was alive. Alive. She sobbed uncontrollably, holding Maria as though afraid she might vanish if she let go. Maria, weak and disoriented, clung to her mother, her own tears mingling with Elena's. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, neither wanting to break the moment. As dawn broke through the curtains, Elena finally managed to compose herself enough to ask the questions burning in her mind. "Maria, my darling, what happened? How are you still alive?" she asked softly, stroking her daughter's hair. Maria took a deep breath, her voice shaky but determined. "I don't remember much," she began. "There was an explosion during our mission. I got hit and everything went black. When I woke up, I was in some kind of medical tent. People were rushing around shouting. I tried to tell them I was alive, but no one listened. I must have passed out again because the next thing I knew, I was in a box. Cold, dark, and scared." Elena listened in horror, her blood running cold. "They thought you were dead," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "They didn't even check properly, they just assumed." Maria nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to scream, Mama, but I couldn't. I thought I'd never see you again." Elena's heart ached for her daughter, but alongside her sorrow, a fiery determination began to burn. Someone had failed Maria, failed her horribly, and Elena was going to find out who. But first, they needed to deal with the immediate problem. Maria wasn't supposed to be alive. If anyone discovered the truth, they would both face severe consequences. Desecrating a grave and falsifying records were serious crimes, and Elena knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. For the next few days, Elena devoted herself to nursing Maria back to health. She prepared warm meals, cleaned her wounds, and ensured she rested enough. Slowly, but surely, Maria regained her strength. Their bond grew stronger during those quiet days, filled with whispered conversations and shared moments of gratitude. Yet, despite the joy of having her daughter back, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. One afternoon, as Maria rested in bed, Elena sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents she had gathered. Birth certificates, identification papers, and official notices, all proof that Maria was supposed to be dead. She realized they needed a plan, not just to survive, but to expose the truth. Who else might have suffered because of the same negligence? How many families were mourning loved ones who weren't truly gone? Determined to act, Elena decided to confront the military officials responsible for declaring Maria dead. She contacted Colonel Harris, the man who had delivered the devastating news months earlier. After several attempts, she secured a meeting with him at his office. On the appointed day, Elena dressed in her best clothes, clutching Maria's file tightly in her hands. As she walked into the imposing building, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and resolve. Colonel Harris greeted her with a polite smile, motioning for her to sit. He seemed calm, almost dismissive, until Elena placed Maria's file on his desk and revealed the shocking truth. "My daughter is alive," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She was declared dead without proper examination. "I want answers, Colonel." The colonel's face paled instantly. He stammered, trying to explain away the situation. "Mrs. Elena, this must be a misunderstanding. Perhaps there was an error." "No," Elena interrupted sharply. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. My daughter was buried alive because of your carelessness. I want to know why this happened. Why wasn't she checked thoroughly? Why did you rush her burial?" Harris hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, he admitted the truth, or at least part of it. "We've been under immense pressure to reduce casualty reports," he confessed reluctantly. "Budget cuts and political demands forced us to cut corners. Some soldiers declared dead were never examined properly. We assumed they wouldn't survive their injuries." Elena's stomach churned with disgust. This wasn't just negligence. It was systemic failure, a betrayal of trust at the highest level. She demanded accountability, vowing to make sure no other family suffered as hers had. Before leaving the office, she warned Harris that she would go public if necessary. The scandal had to come to light, no matter the cost. Back home, Elena shared her plans with Maria, who supported her decision wholeheartedly. Together, they contacted journalists, reaching out to anyone who would listen. Elena's story spread quickly, capturing national attention. Families who had lost loved ones in similar circumstances came forward, sharing their own suspicions and heartbreaks. Public outrage mounted, forcing the government to launch an investigation into the military's practices. Through it all, Elena remained steadfast, fueled by a mother's love and a desire for justice. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew they had already won the most important battle. They had saved Maria. As she watched her daughter regain her strength and spirit, Elena allowed herself a small measure of peace. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in months she felt a glimmer of hope. The truth, no matter how painful, had set them free, and Elena was ready to fight for everyone else who deserved the same chance. The days following Elena's confrontation with Colonel Harris were a whirlwind of activity. News of Maria's miraculous survival spread like wildfire, igniting outrage across the nation. Journalists flocked to Elena's small village, eager to hear her story firsthand. At first, Elena hesitated to speak publicly. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight and feared the consequences of exposing such a sensitive issue. But as more families came forward with similar suspicions about their deceased loved ones, she realized she couldn't stay silent. Her voice had become a beacon of hope for others seeking answers. Elena began by sharing her ordeal during interviews with local newspapers and television stations. Sitting in her modest living room, surrounded by reporters scribbling notes and cameras rolling, she recounted every painful detail, from receiving the news of Maria's death to digging up her grave under the cover of darkness. Her words carried a raw honesty that resonated deeply with those who listened. "I did what any mother would do," she said firmly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I followed my instincts because I knew something wasn't right. And now, I'm fighting not just for my daughter, but for all the families who've been failed by this system." As the story gained traction, it sparked widespread debate about military accountability and transparency. Politicians weighed in, promising investigations and reforms. Protesters gathered outside government buildings holding signs that read, "Justice for our heroes and no more mistakes." Social media buzzed with hashtags like, "Bring them back" and "Truth for families." People from all walks of life joined, the chorus demanding change. For Elena, seeing the collective anger and solidarity was both overwhelming and empowering. She never imagined her personal tragedy could ignite such a movement, but not everyone welcomed the exposure. Some members of the military pushed back against the allegations, accusing Elena of exaggerating the situation for attention. Others dismissed her claims as isolated incidents, insisting that mistakes happen in war zones where resources are limited. These dismissals only fueled Elena's determination to dig deeper. With Maria's help, she started reaching out to other families whose loved ones had died under suspicious circumstances. They compiled testimonies, medical records, and burial reports, building a case that exposed the scale of the problem. One family stood out among the many who contacted Elena. a couple named Rosa and Miguel, whose son, Luis, had been declared dead after a supposed ambush. Like Maria, Luis had shown no visible injuries when his body was returned home. His parents had requested an autopsy, but their pleas were ignored due to protocol constraints. When they finally managed to examine the remains themselves, they discovered bruises and marks inconsistent with the official report. Hearing their story broke Elena's heart anew, reinforcing her belief that systemic negligence went far beyond individual cases. Determined to amplify these voices, Elena organized a meeting with representatives from affected families. Dozens of people gathered in her village hall, united by grief and frustration. Many arrived carrying photographs of their lost loved ones, clutching them tightly as if afraid to let go. As they shared their stories, a pattern emerged. Hurried declarations of death, lack of proper examinations, rushed burials without family consent. The room filled with sobs and murmurs of disbelief, but also with a growing sense of resolve. Together, they decided to form a coalition called Families for Accountability, FFA, dedicated to uncovering the truth and ensuring justice for their children. Maria played a crucial role in the group, using her experience to guide others through the emotional turmoil of questioning their loss. Though still recovering physically and emotionally, she found strength in helping others navigate their pain. "We're not alone in this," she told the group during one particularly emotional session. "Our voices together are louder than silence. Let's make sure no one else has to live with unanswered questions." With FFA gaining momentum, Elena turned her focus to lobbying lawmakers and government officials. She traveled to the capital city, accompanied by Maria and a few other members of the coalition, to present their findings before a parliamentary committee. Standing in front of stern-faced politicians, Elena laid out the evidence they had gathered, documents proving discrepancies in casualty reports, witness accounts of mishandled procedures, and heartbreaking letters from bereaved families. Her presentation was calm yet impassioned, leaving no room for doubt about the gravity of the issue. One senator, visibly moved by Elena's testimony, promised immediate action. "This is unacceptable," he declared, slamming his fist on the table. "These brave men and women gave everything for our country. The least we can do is ensure their deaths are handled with dignity and respect." Within weeks, a formal investigation was launched, led by independent auditors tasked with reviewing military protocols and identifying areas of misconduct. Meanwhile, Elena continued to advocate for broader reforms beyond the investigation. She proposed mandatory second opinions for battlefield casualties, improved communication between military personnel and families, and stricter penalties for negligence. Her suggestions were met with resistance from certain factions within the government, but public support kept the pressure on. Protest marches grew larger, petitions garnered millions of signatures, and even celebrities joined the cause, amplifying the message on global platforms. Despite the progress, Elena faced significant challenges along the way. Anonymous threats began arriving at her doorstep, letters warning her to stop meddling or face consequences. Some nights she lay awake, wondering if she had put herself and Maria in danger. Yet whenever fear crept in, she reminded herself why she had started this fight. "If I stop now," she often told Maria, "then what was all of this for? We've come too far to turn back." Maria, ever supportive, encouraged her mother to keep going. "You're stronger than you think, Mama," she said one evening as they sat together on the porch. "And you're not doing this alone. Look, how many people believe in us." Indeed, the community rallied around Elena and Maria, offering protection and encouragement. Neighbors took turns keeping watch over their house, while volunteers helped organize events and fundraisers to sustain the campaign. Even strangers sent messages of solidarity, thanking Elena for having the courage to speak up. Slowly but surely, she realized that her fight had become a shared mission, one that transcended individual losses and united people in pursuit of justice. By the time the investigation concluded several months later, its findings shocked the nation. Hundreds of cases of misreported deaths were uncovered, revealing a culture of haste and indifference within certain branches of the military. Several high-ranking officials were stripped of their positions, and new policies were implemented to prevent future errors. While the changes weren't perfect, they marked a significant step toward accountability. A victory Elena and the coalition celebrated as a hard-won triumph. Through it all, Elena learned that resilience wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about enduring it and emerging stronger. She had started this journey as a grieving mother desperate to save her daughter, but she ended it as a symbol of hope and perseverance. Her story inspired countless others to question authority, demand transparency, and stand up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such upheaval, Elena reflected on how far they had come. Maria, now fully recovered, enrolled in university to study law, driven by a desire to continue fighting for justice. Together, they rebuilt their lives, cherishing each moment they had been given a second chance to share. Though scars remained, both, visible and invisible, they found solace in knowing they had made a difference. Elena's journey taught her that sometimes the unthinkable turns out to be true, and that in the darkest moments, hope and courage can prevail. As the investigation into military negligence unfolded, Elena found herself at the center of a storm that showed no signs of calming. The revelations were staggering. Hundreds of cases where soldiers had been declared dead without proper examination. Their families left to grieve based on assumptions rather than facts. For every story uncovered, there was a family torn apart by loss and unanswered questions. Elena knew she couldn't stop now. The fight wasn't just about Maria anymore. It was about all those who had been failed. The Families for Accountability, FFA coalition grew rapidly, attracting members from across the country. What started as a small group of grieving parents became a nationwide movement. Elena traveled tirelessly, meeting with affected families, speaking at rallies, and appearing on television to keep the pressure on. Her days blurred together in a haze of meetings, interviews, and late-night strategy sessions. Despite the exhaustion, she felt alive in a way she hadn't since before Maria's disappearance. She was doing something meaningful, not just for herself but for others. One evening, after returning home from yet another long day of advocacy work, Elena sat down with Maria. The two shared a quiet dinner, the kind they rarely had time for these days. "Mama," Maria said softly, breaking the silence, "do you ever feel like we're trying to hold back an ocean with our bare hands?" Elena smiled faintly, her eyes weary but determined. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But even if we can only stop one wave, it's worth it. Every life matters, Maria. Every single one." Maria nodded, understanding the weight of her mother's words. Though she was proud of what they had accomplished so far, she worried about the toll it was taking on Elena. The threats continued to arrive, some more menacing than others. One letter written in jagged handwriting read, "Stop stirring trouble or your daughter will pay the price." It chilled Elena to the bone, but instead of backing down, she doubled her efforts. If anything, the intimidation made her more resolute. She hired security guards to patrol their property and installed cameras around the house, ensuring Maria's safety while she carried on with her mission. Despite the risks, support for Elena's cause poured in from unexpected places. Local businesses donated funds to help cover travel expenses for families attending hearings and protests. Teachers organized educational workshops in schools to teach students about accountability and civic responsibility. Even some retired military personnel came forward, admitting they had witnessed similar oversights during their service and expressing regret for not speaking up sooner. These acts of solidarity gave Elena strength when doubt crept in. However, not everyone appreciated her crusade. Some accused her of tarnishing the reputation of the armed forces, arguing that mistakes were inevitable in wartime. Others dismissed her as a hysterical mother unable to accept her daughter's fate. At public events, hecklers occasionally shouted insults, calling her selfish and unpatriotic. Once, during a televised debate, a former general sneered at her, saying, "You're exploiting tragedy for personal gain. Soldiers die for their country. It's honorable, not something to question." Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned Forward, her voice steady and clear. Honorable deaths deserve honorable treatment, she replied. My daughter survived because I refused to accept lies. How many other families are mourning someone who might still be alive? Are you telling me that's acceptable? Her response earned applause from the audience, silencing the critic. Moments like these reminded Elena why she kept pushing forward. Each victory, no matter how small, fueled her determination to see justice served. Back in her village, Elena noticed subtle changes in the community. Neighbors who once whispered behind her back now greeted her warmly, offering words of encouragement. Children drew pictures of her and Maria, depicting them as heroes standing up against injustice. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her for giving them hope. While Elena appreciated the kindness, she remained focused on the task ahead. Praise wouldn't bring back those who had been wrongfully declared dead, nor would it fix the broken system that allowed such tragedies to happen. As the months passed, the parliamentary committee tasked with investigating military procedures released its interim report. The findings confirmed what Elena and the FFA had suspected. Systemic failures plagued the handling of battlefield casualties. Medical teams were understaffed and overworked, leading to rushed diagnoses. Communication between field units and headquarters was inconsistent, resulting in incorrect casualty reports. In some cases, bodies were shipped home without proper documentation or verification. The report concluded that reforms were urgently needed to restore trust and ensure accountability. While the acknowledgement of wrongdoing was a step in the right direction, Elena knew real change required action, not just words. She pushed lawmakers to implement concrete measures, including mandatory second opinions for critical injuries, transparent reporting processes, and independent oversight boards to monitor compliance. She also advocated for compensation packages for families impacted by misreported deaths, acknowledging the emotional and financial burdens they endured. Some progress came quickly. New protocols were introduced to standardize casualty reporting, and additional funding was allocated to improve medical facilities in conflict zones. However, resistance lingered among certain factions within the military, who viewed the reforms as unnecessary bureaucracy. Elena faced heated debates in legislative chambers, where opponents argued that increased regulations would hinder operational efficiency. Undeterred, she countered their arguments with logic and passion, reminding them that human lives were at stake. Through it all, Maria stood by her mother's side, lending her voice to the cause whenever possible. Inspired by Elena's bravery, she decided to pursue a career in law, specializing in human rights advocacy. I want to help people like us, she told Elena one night as they discussed her future plans. People who don't have a voice, or who are too afraid to use it. Elena beamed with pride, though a part of her wished Maria could focus solely on rebuilding her own life. Still, she understood her daughter's desire to make a difference. Together, they represented resilience and hope, a testament to the power of love and perseverance. By the end of the year, the movement Elena had sparked had transformed the national conversation. Politicians who initially resisted reform began championing transparency initiatives, eager to align themselves with public sentiment. Educational programs were launched to train military personnel in ethical decision-making and compassionate communication with families. Memorials were erected to honor soldiers whose stories had been overshadowed by negligence, serving as reminders of the importance of accountability. Yet, for all the victories, Elena knew the journey wasn't over. Change took time, and old habits died hard. There would always be challenges to overcome, battles to fight. But she had learned to embrace uncertainty, trusting that each step forward brought them closer to a better future. Late one evening, as winter settled over the village, Elena stood on her porch staring at the stars. Maria joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Do you think we'll ever truly move past this?" Maria asked quietly. Elena sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "Maybe not completely," she admitted. "But I believe we've planted seeds that will grow into something bigger than us. Someday people will look back and remember how we fought for truth and fairness. That's enough for me." Maria smiled, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. They stayed like that for a while, finding peace in the quiet moments they had fought so hard to reclaim. No matter what lay ahead, they faced it together, as survivors, as advocates, and above all, as family. The months that followed the release of the Parliamentary Committee's interim report were a whirlwind of activity for Elena and the Families for Accountability, FFA coalition. While the findings validated their claims, Elena knew that real change required sustained effort. The fight was far from over, and she refused to let momentum slip away. Her days were filled with meetings, protests, and media appearances, each one bringing new challenges and opportunities. One of the biggest hurdles came when lawmakers proposed watered-down versions of the reforms Elena had advocated for. Instead of mandatory second opinions for battlefield casualties, they suggested optional reviews conducted by the same medical teams responsible for initial assessments. Transparency measures were framed as recommendations rather than enforceable policies, leaving room for interpretation and potential negligence. Elena saw through the thinly veiled attempts to appease critics without addressing the root causes of the problem. Furious but undeterred, Elena rallied the FFA members to push back harder. She organized a massive protest in the capital city, drawing thousands of people from across the country. Banners fluttered in the wind bearing slogans like, "Truth cannot wait," and "Justice for our fallen heroes." Speakers took turns sharing their stories, their voices trembling with emotion, but unwavering in resolve. When it was Elena's turn to address the crowd, she stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding attention despite her petite frame. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady but impassioned, "we are here today because we refuse to accept half measures. Our loved ones deserve better. They gave everything for this nation, some even sacrificed their lives. How can we stand idly by while those in power offer us empty promises? We demand action, not words." The crowd erupted into cheers, chanting Elena's name as she raised her fist in solidarity. It was moments like these that reminded her why she kept fighting. Each cheer, each clap, reinforced her belief that they were making a difference, not just for themselves, but for future generations. But the road ahead remained fraught with obstacles. Some politicians accused Elena of being too radical, claiming her demands were unrealistic and impractical. Others tried to discredit her by questioning her motives, suggesting she sought fame or financial gain. These attacks stung, but Elena refused to let them derail her mission. Instead, she used them as fuel to prove her detractors wrong. Maria, meanwhile, continued to support her mother while pursuing her own path. Now enrolled in law school, she immersed herself in courses on human rights and constitutional law. Her professors praised her dedication, noting how her personal experiences enriched classroom discussions. Outside of academics, Maria volunteered at legal aid clinics, helping families navigate bureaucratic red tape to uncover the truth about their loved ones' deaths. Watching her daughter grow into such a compassionate and driven individual filled Elena with immense pride. Despite their progress, threats against Elena persisted. One night, as she returned home from a late-night meeting, she noticed unfamiliar tire tracks near her driveway. The next morning, a brick smashed through her kitchen window, accompanied by a note warning her to back off. Shaken but resolute, Elena called the police and tightened security around the house. She also reached out to allies within the FFA network, asking for additional protection during public events. Though fear lingered in the corners of her mind, she refused to let it dictate her actions. Her determination inspired others to join the cause. A group of tech-savvy volunteers created an online platform where families could share information and connect with legal experts offering pro bono services. Another team developed a mobile app designed to track casualty reports in real time, allowing users to flag inconsistencies and report them directly to oversight boards. These innovations expanded the reach of the movement, empowering more people to take part in the fight for accountability. Back in the village, Elena's neighbors continued to rally around her. Local farmers donated produce to feed protesters gathering in nearby towns, while shopkeepers offered discounts to families traveling long distances to attend hearings. Even children pitched in, organizing bake sales and charity runs to raise funds for the coalition. The sense of unity was palpable, a testament to the impact Elena's courage had on those around her. As winter gave way to spring, the pressure on lawmakers intensified. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for stricter regulations and independent oversight. Facing mounting criticism, several high-ranking officials resigned, citing personal reasons. Meanwhile, independent auditors uncovered evidence of corruption within certain military units, implicating individuals who had knowingly falsified casualty reports to meet quotas or avoid scrutiny. Arrest warrants were issued, sending shockwaves through the system. Amidst the chaos, Elena received an unexpected invitation to speak at an international conference on human rights in Geneva. Initially hesitant due to the distance and cost, she accepted after learning that Maria had applied for a scholarship to attend alongside her. Together, they prepared extensively, determined to present their case on a global stage. For weeks, they pored over documents, rehearsed speeches, and strategized ways to engage delegates from different countries. When the day finally arrived, Elena stood before an audience of diplomats, activists, and journalists from around the world. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice rang clear and confident. "My story is not unique," she began, scanning the sea of faces before her. "It is echoed by countless families whose loved ones have been failed by systems meant to protect them. Today I ask you, what kind of society are we building if we cannot ensure dignity and justice for those who serve us?" Her speech resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Delegates approached her afterward, expressing admiration for her bravery and commitment. Representatives from international organizations promised to assist in implementing reforms, offering resources and expertise to strengthen accountability mechanisms worldwide. By the end of the conference, Elena had secured partnerships with multiple NGOs dedicated to supporting victims of systemic negligence. Returning home, Elena and Maria were greeted as heroes. News outlets covered their trip extensively, highlighting the global recognition their efforts had garnered. More importantly, the exposure brought renewed energy to the movement. Donations poured in, enabling the FFA to expand its operations and provide greater assistance to affected families. Workshops were held to educate communities about their rights, empowering them to hold institutions accountable. Yet, amidst the accolades, Elena remained grounded. She understood that true success lay not in applause or awards, but in tangible improvements to people's lives. She focused on implementing practical solutions, working closely with government agencies to streamline processes and eliminate loopholes. Regular audits became mandatory, and whistleblower protections were strengthened to encourage transparency. By summer, the first wave of reforms took effect. Military hospitals adopted standardized procedures for diagnosing and reporting casualties, ensuring thorough examinations before declaring anyone dead. Independent oversight boards were established, tasked with monitoring compliance and investigating complaints. Compensation packages were introduced for families impacted by misreported deaths, providing financial relief and access to counseling services. While the changes didn't erase the pain of loss, they offered some measure of closure. Families who had spent years searching for answers finally received acknowledgement of their suffering. Memorials were updated to include names previously omitted, honoring soldiers whose contributions had gone unrecognized. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild between citizens and the institutions meant to serve them. For Elena, seeing the fruits of her labor brought both joy and reflection. She realized that her journey had transformed her in ways she never anticipated. Once a quiet, reserved woman defined by grief, she now embodied resilience and purpose. Her love for Maria had propelled her forward, turning tragedy into triumph. And though scars remained, both visible and invisible, they served as reminders of the strength she had discovered within herself. Late one evening, as golden sunlight bathed the village in warmth, Elena and Maria walked hand in hand through the cemetery where it all began. They stopped at Maria's old grave, now marked with a simple plaque commemorating her miraculous survival. Standing there together, they felt a profound sense of gratitude for life, for love, and for the power of hope in the face of despair. "We've come so far, Mama," Maria said softly, squeezing her mother's hand. Elena nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, my darling, but remember, no matter what happens next, we'll always face it together." And with that, they turned and walked away, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The final chapter of Elena's journey unfolded not with a grand finale, but with the quiet satisfaction of seeing seeds planted years ago finally bloom. The reforms she and the Families for Accountability FFA coalition had fought so hard to implement were now bearing fruit across the nation. Military hospitals operated with greater transparency, independent oversight boards ensured accountability, and families no longer lived in fear of being dismissed or ignored when questioning their loved ones' fates. Yet for Elena, this wasn't just about policy changes. It was about healing wounds that ran deeper than any document could address. As autumn settled over the village, painting the hillsides with fiery hues of orange and red, Elena found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that fateful night she dug up Maria's grave. Back then, her world had been consumed by grief and desperation. Now, though scars remained, there was light where once only darkness existed. She often thought about the ripple effect of her actions, how one mother's determination had sparked a movement that touched thousands of lives. Maria, too, had grown into a remarkable young woman. Her studies in law were nearing completion, and she had already begun interning at a prestigious human rights organization. Her professors praised her sharp intellect and unwavering compassion, qualities shaped by the hardships she had endured. On weekends, she traveled to rural communities, holding workshops for families navigating similar struggles. "I want to help people find their voice," she told Elena during one of their late-night conversations. "Just like you helped me." Elena smiled, pride swelling in her chest. Watching Maria transform pain into purpose filled her with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. Still, she worried sometimes about the toll the fight might take on her daughter, about whether they'd done enough. But Maria always reassured her. "We're making a difference, Mama, that's what matters." Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Some military factions resisted the new protocols, arguing they slowed operations and created unnecessary bureaucracy. Others accused Elena and the FFA of exaggerating the scale of the problem, claiming the reforms were unnecessary and overly punitive. These criticisms weighed heavily on Elena, especially when they came from those who still refused to acknowledge the harm caused by negligence. Yet she refused to let them derail her mission. Instead, she doubled down on education campaigns, emphasizing the importance of ethical practices and compassionate communication. One particularly difficult moment came when a high-profile case brought the issue back into the spotlight. A soldier named Daniel, declared dead after a skirmish overseas, was discovered alive months later thanks to his family's persistent questioning. His story echoed Maria's, reigniting public outrage and forcing lawmakers to revisit the reforms. This time, however, Elena approached the situation differently. Rather than confront adversaries head-on, she invited them to listen, to hear directly from families whose lives had been shattered by mistakes. She organized a series of town hall meetings, bringing together grieving parents, military officials, and policymakers. At these gatherings, raw emotions flowed freely as participants shared their stories. One father broke down while describing how he had begged for an autopsy only to be turned away. Another recounted the devastation of realizing his son might have survived if proper procedures had been followed. Military representatives listened silently, many visibly moved by the testimonies. Through these dialogues, bridges began to form. Slowly, skeptics started to see the human cost behind the statistics. They recognized that reform wasn't about assigning blame, it was about preventing future tragedies. By fostering empathy and understanding, Elena managed to shift the narrative, turning critics into allies. In the midst of these efforts, Elena also prioritized self-care, a lesson she had learned the hard way. For years, she had poured every ounce of energy into her advocacy work, neglecting her own well-being. But as Maria reminded her repeatedly, "You can't pour from an empty cup." So she started taking walks in the forest, journaling her thoughts and reconnecting with old friends. These small acts of kindness toward herself helped restore balance, allowing her to continue her work without burning out. By winter, the movement had reached new heights. International organizations praised Elena's leadership, citing her campaign as a model for grassroots activism. Awards rolled in, one recognizing her contributions to human rights, another honoring her resilience in the face of adversity. While Elena accepted them graciously, she never lost sight of the bigger picture. "These accolades belong to everyone who stood with us," she said during an acceptance speech. "This is your victory as much as it is mine." Yet, perhaps the most profound reward came in quieter moments. Letters arrived daily from strangers thanking Elena for giving them hope. Some shared stories of closure achieved through the new systems. Others expressed gratitude simply for knowing they weren't alone. Each message reinforced her belief in the power of collective action. On Christmas Eve, Elena hosted a gathering at her home, inviting members of the FFA coalition and their families. The house buzzed with laughter and warmth as people exchanged gifts and shared meals. For the first time in years, Elena felt truly at peace. Surrounded by loved ones, she realized that the bonds forged through struggle were among the strongest connections one could have. Maria stood beside her, watching the scene unfold. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting?" she asked quietly. Elena considered the question, her gaze drifting toward the flickering fireplace. "Probably not," she replied with a gentle smile. "But that's okay. Fighting doesn't mean we're stuck in the past. It means we're building a better future. And as long as there's work to be done, we'll keep going." The year ended on a hopeful note, with plans underway to expand the FFA's reach internationally. Elena envisioned a global network of advocates working together to ensure accountability and justice for all. It was a daunting goal, but she believed anything was possible with perseverance and unity. As fireworks lit up the sky on New Year's Eve, Elena and Maria stood side by side, arms wrapped around each other. Behind them, the village celebrated, its spirit renewed by the changes they had inspired. In that moment, Elena felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, for life, for love, and for the courage to face the unknown. Their journey hadn't been easy, nor had it followed a straight path. There had been heartbreak, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But through it all, they had held on to hope, and to each other. And as they stepped into the new year, hand in hand, they did so with the knowledge that even in the darkest times, light could prevail. For Elena, the true measure of success wasn't in the laws passed or awards won. It was in the lives touched and transformed. Hers was a story of resilience, love, and the unyielding belief that truth and justice were worth fighting for. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, she faced it with the same determination that had carried her this far. Because in the end, Elena understood something profound. Sometimes, the greatest victories are not the battles we win, but the lives we save along the way.